that.
So another week, another round of legal challenges to President Trump's busy agenda, from DOJ efforts to deportations. Democrats are making full use of the only leverage they really seem to have to try to slow down the president, which is the courts. How quickly will some of these cases go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court? Well, let's bring in our legal panel. Ilya Shapiro, Manhattan Institute Senior Fellow and Director of Constitutional Studies, and Tom Dupree, former Principal Deputy Assistant U.S. Attorney General during the George W. Bush administration. Great to have you back with us. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of these nationwide injunctions. You've got hundreds of federal district court judges, and any one of them right now can put all kinds of things on hold. A number of the justices have expressed concern about this. Something from Justice Thomas in a 2018 decision, a concurrence, said, "I'm skeptical the district courts have the authority to enter universal injunctions if their popularity continues. This court must address their legality." A 2020 concurrence from Justice Gorsuch said, "By their nature, these injunctions tend to force judges into making rushed, high-stakes, low-information decisions. A single loss and the policy goes on ice, possibly for good." Ilya, will they rule? Is it time? Have they gotten to this conversation now?
It's more than time for the Supreme Court to give guidance, not just putting an end to it necessarily. In certain cases, you can imagine you only want one policy for the whole government. Let's say a restriction on travel. You can't have different rules for customs in JFK Airport versus LAX. But the appeals have to be accelerated. The Supreme Court might need to step in. And at the end of the day, I like the idea of having a 3-judge panel. This wouldn't require new legislation from Congress. But if you're challenging a nationwide program, there should be more than one judge involved.
Well, and it's not just those two justices who've spoken about it. Here's Justice Kagan back in 2022.
You look at something like that and you think, that can't be right. In the Trump years, people used to go to the Northern District of California. And in the Biden years, they go to Texas. And it just can't be right that one district judge can stop a nationwide policy in its tracks.
Yeah, and she said, and leave it stopped for years that it takes to go through this normal process. It turns into this forum shopping exercise.
That's exactly it, Shannon. And look, I don't say this often, but Justice Kagan is exactly right here. And that she does
Tom Dupree, Justice Kagan
I'm
is
going
exactly
on the
right.
record. She nailed it, Shannon. Because here's the thing, is that what we have seen, and we're seeing right now, is the liberal playbook is you basically want to stop a Trump policy cold. What you do is you search around to find the judicial district and possibly even the judge that you can shop for who is likeliest to issue that nationwide injunction. I don't think that's a good thing for our legal system. And that's why I do think it makes sense to at least consider possible different approaches where you would get a small group of judges, a panel of judges, to make what is a hugely momentous decision.
Well, through all of this, there's been a lot of frustration, and some of the president's supporters have said, and the president, maybe we need to impeach some of these judges. So the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, said this Monday, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. Tom, he doesn't often say things like this publicly.
He does not. And look, that language he used, that it is not appropriate for Chief Justice, mild-mannered Chief Justice Roberts, that is like an expression of fury.
It's like tweeting in all caps.
It is.
Right.
It's his all caps version saying it's not appropriate. And look, I think politically, impeachment is just a super, super heavy lift, right? You would have to get to 2/3 of the Senate. That's never going to happen in this context. I think the right approach is actually the one that President Trump himself said in that interview clip you played, is that if you don't like a judicial decision, I think it's perfectly fair to criticize the substance of that decision. Judges are fair game for criticizing their decisions, and then you appeal it to the higher courts. You go to the Court of Appeals, and if necessary, to the Supreme Court of the United States. That's the best route, not impeachment.
Okay, so Sean Davis, who's the co-founder and CEO of The Federalist, said this on X in responding to Chief Justice Roberts. He said, had Roberts done his job and restrained inferior judges from overstepping their bounds and claiming for themselves authority and power which does not belong to them, he would not find himself in this predicament. What do you make of that, Ilya?
I think that's generally right. The Supreme Court needs to rein in some of these temporary restraining orders, TROs, which are, you talk about regular process. TROs aren't supposed to be appealable in the first place. And yet we have TROs issued about spending billions of dollars and things like this. So Roberts had the opportunity a couple of times already. Some of these have gone to the court, and the court has not given further guidance to the lower court judges. So whether you agree with what Roberts said or not, I think in terms of actually affecting the process, I think if he had a firmer reign, then indeed there would be less of this kind of chaos and both sides questioning the legitimacy of the judiciary.
Okay, one of the hottest debates has been over the use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport people. Last weekend, there were these plane loads of Venezuelans who left. The administration said these are gang members. It was time for them to go. They went to the Salvadoran prison. But a legal filing for the attorneys for those deported Venezuelans says this: if the president can designate any group as enemy aliens under the act, and that designation is unreviewable, then there's no limit on who can be sent to a Salvadoran prison or any limit on how long they will remain there. Ilya.
Well, there are, as we've learned from the Mahmoud Khalil case and other people being arrested for engaging in various protests that violate the immigration rules about who can stay, what qualifies you or disqualifies you for a visa. Same thing for gang members. If you're designated as a group that is against our national interests, the Alien Enemies Act is an old law. It's only been used during wartime, but the law is the law, and it states plainly what's going on. So there's been a lot of skirmishing over whether the plane was already in the air, had it departed our airspace, and what have you. But on the substance, I think the administration is within its powers, certainly with illegal aliens, but even with those on visas, to pull those if there's an administrative determination.
Yeah, Judge Boasberg says he's going to get to the bottom of those planes and when they left and hold people accountable. That's still being ironed out. But to this issue of whether or not everybody on that plane was a gang member, because there are family members who've come forward, as they would, to say they've been caught up wrongfully in this whole thing. But Wall Street Journal reports this. ICE officials say they vetted each Venezuelan, taking court records, interviews with suspected members, surveillance, and other evidence into account. Quote, ICE did not simply rely on social media posts, photographs of the alien displaying gang hand-related gestures or tattoos alone. That's from an acting immigration official. Where do we go from here, Tom?
Well, a few points, Shannon. Number one is I would say, look, there's no question that these people got more due process in the United States than they would have in probably almost any other country in the world. Second point is that I start with the text of the Constitution when you're talking about the president's powers. And when the president is acting under his commander-in-chief authority or his power to direct the United States foreign relations, he is at the peak of his powers. Does that mean that judges have zero role to play? Maybe not. It's possible. You could say judges must review the threshold decision as to whether there's been a predatory incursion and whether he properly invoked his powers, but there's no question that the president has a strong hand to play here. He is acting within very broad authority conferred by Congress under the Alien Enemies Act.
Okay, so quickly, we have several rulings that deal with probationary employees or people who have been fired, bringing them back or stopping the firings. It seems to me there's some language in some of these rulings that says maybe Doge and Elon Musk can't do it, but maybe the agency heads or the president more directly can do this.
I think that's right. You can do it at some point in some way. So the only question here is whether administration lawyers have crossed the T's and dotted the I's. There's no law in the book saying once employees are hired, you can't get rid of them unless they commit some sort of malfeasance. You can have reduction in force and layoffs and all of these sorts of things. So I'm confident that sooner or later this will all get sorted out, whether it's Elon, whether it's Trump directing one of Elon's colleagues or what have you.
Quick final word, Tom.
I think ultimately the president is going to be very successful in reducing the size of the federal government. Whether or not they have to do a do-over as to particular employees that were fired and say the president has to do it, not Elon Musk, maybe. But the president is ultimately going to get where he wants to go with the reduction in force.
All right, we may have to keep you two on retainer because there's going to be a lot to discuss. Thank you very much for being in here today.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.